we're maturing as a species. This authority model is shifting, and it needs to for this new age. With my students, I think it's really important that they know that they're the ones that have the direct connection. The guru or the teacher or the church putting themselves between the seeker and source is where it gets messy. They're meant to point the way, to guide, but then always putting it back to the seeker. They're the ones doing it, not the teacher. Mystical experiences can be misattributed to the teacher.
Attributing them to psychedelics or any of these plant medicines, starting to feel dependent on any one catalyst is, again, where you start to negotiate your power. I have a few friends who have been called to Egypt in the last, 5 months or so. But just to echo, it's like that exact frequency is available to access in your backyard in Ohio.
Welcome to Soul Pod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. Welcome back, light beings. We are going to have a very leading edge conversation today about guru culture and the shifts that are happening in the vein of authority when it comes to spirituality. And this is a very nuanced conversation. So we're going to be exploring both the contemporary, what's going on right now in our society, as certain things come to light. This is a time of that which has been hidden coming forward. And there's a lot to balance here in this conversation. So we invite you into this with an open heart, a curious mind. And I am joined by Kat Mansfield today. Welcome back, Kat.
Hello.
All right. So let's get into it. Guru culture. My first question to kick us off is why have we looked to gurus? Why do we want a guru? Why do we want a spiritual teacher? I think that's the nature of our explorative self, our spiritual self. Why do we look to that? What do you think, Kat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good question to kick us off, because if we look back in time, it's how we've been oriented for thousands of years now. Like, we've been oriented to look towards a being that is more enlightened, further along in their spiritual journey, to give us the answers. And so I think there's a desire to, in a way, kind of shortcut the work of like if we're given this prayer to say, if we're given these specific mantras to sit with, then it will shortcut the work. It will get us there faster, which again, then we're orienting around spirituality as if there's a destination, as if we are trying to reach this place of enlightenment, and this specific person or practice is going to get us there. And so in that, we, give them so much of our power and our trust and our willingness to arrive at that destination, makes it so that our judgment is vulnerable. Our ability to discern truth from distortion is weaker, is lessened, is less sharp. So to answer your question, I think it's something that is just so deeply embedded in our culture. And unfortunately, I think it's something that's been embedded as a means of manipulation, because if humanity is looking towards being a dogma that is pedestalized as the answer, then we're a lot easier to control. We're a lot easier to keep in fear and to lead to, whatever they want us to do, that they being the guru, the dogma, the religion. Um, what do you think?
Yeah, I think people are, and there's completely understandable reasons for all of this. So I think people are looking for, especially when they realize that there might be some value where they feel despondent, and even what we see a lot is people coming to spirituality when they are going through hardships, they're trying
Mhm.
to heal. And there's a very different context, I think, now versus thousands of years in the relationship to what we're calling guru culture. And I think people are looking for purpose. I think they're looking for relief. I think that they're looking for meaning. And for those, especially in the past, when we talk about even like the temples of Egypt, any of these places where their devotion was involved.
Mm.
And devotion, I think it can be both very healthy and dedicated, and it can also be a slippery slope for being, like you said, taken advantage of
Mhm.
if the leadership that's in place is not doing the work that they're supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that I think that every teacher that stepped into power, perceived power, started off as a predator.
Mhm.
I do think it can evolve because, and there's a lot to get to in this conversation. I'm starting to go in another direction, but there's ongoing work that's required.
Mhm.
And if you're not doing the work as a leader in any capacity, then there's some really big damage that can be done. But I think to answer that question, why do people look to gurus? Why do people look to these enlightened, or we could call them spiritually advanced teachers? Is because they're looking for answers. They want
Mhm.
answers. There's
Mhm.
something inside them, which is extremely valid. It's inside me as well. It's like,
Mhm.
who am I and why am I here?
Mhm.
And this is somewhere that you can go to try and get those answers. The
Mhm.
method of delivery of how you reach those answers is where there's an opportunity and there's also damage that can be
Mhm.
done. And so I think what's happening now is that because of information, because of the internet, because of social media, because of how hyper connected we are, there's now a level of visibility that we did not have
Mhm.
that is available. And that is enabling us as a community to hold to account these people who are in positions of power and who are taking advantage of it.
Mhm.
And so I think this is kind of the next topic here, is that what can happen, and maybe before we get into that, I want to disclose my personal experience because I think this might help people
Mhm.
in orienting to what it means to be a spiritual seeker. And I've had many teachers. I've had Vedic teachers, I've had Zen teachers. I actually have a guru, Guru Singh, shout out to him,
Mm.
that I adore. He's one of my favorite people on this planet. And he's a third generation yogi. And he comes from Paramahansa Yogananda's line, Kriya Yoga. And to answer that question, I can put it back on myself. Why am I studying with a third generation yogi? Well, I think there's great value in that knowledge and wisdom that's been gained through
Mhm.
that lineage. One of my requirements was, and I won't necessarily say which organization, but I had studied for a really long time with another organization, and it comes to a point to where you disavow any other teachers, right? You commit your lifetime to being a student of that lineage.
Wow.
And I'm not being dramatic here when I say that I got that piece of paper and I had the pen in my hand and I was going to sign my name and send it back to the ashram. And I could not sign my name. I could not do it. And I was really torn up inside about it. I meditated on it and talked to my guides. And I just said, I'm too curious. I can't limit myself to one realm of thought. I'm just, that's not the way I'm wired. And I think that's healthy.
Right. And equally so, being curious about why a teacher or a group of teachers would want to limit you to such a limited amount of information or amount of teaching, right? It's like, if it's an opportunity to use your discernment of if this is truth, if what you are sharing as a teacher and a guide is truth, capital T, then no other information that you consume will negate that, will dispel that truth, because truth is absolute. Truth is immortal. So by consuming other information, it's almost like, I think it's always such a green flag with the teacher. And you say this all the time of like, take what you want and also learn anything else, consume, find other teachers, like follow the thread of curiosity that you're being guided towards, wherever that is, whatever books, teachers, lectures, podcasts, and then, integrate with your own system what is true for you, what comes back to capital truth, because you'll know what that feels like in your body, so it's an interesting just kind of audit for any teachers and guides out there, if you have them. It's like, are they encouraging me to explore and come back to this truth that they're sharing, if it's what feels true?
Absolutely. And I think, in Guru Singh and Kundalini Yoga and that whole, explosion of controversy, rightfully so. I think one of the things that's come out of some of that is a heightened awareness of what needs to change. And I really admire teachers, especially those that are have been around for a long time, of handing the baton back to, putting the power back into their community's hands. And that's one of the reasons that I continue to study with who I study with. That has to be the case. And that's where I got the, and there's, this is controversial too, in these communities, the traditionalist, which have a very rigid kind of expectation on this is how things have been done and will always be done. And then there's the more non-traditionalist, or the, I like to call them the spiritual scientists, that are evolving the practices. And I understand, I also studied martial arts for a long time, which intensity doesn't necessarily equal cult, or like my JoJo would have been called a cult. It's very intense. But, I learned there too that there is something beautiful about dedicating yourself to understanding something deeply. So if somebody wanted to sign that piece of paper and study with a lineage and spend their lifetime, I think that's your prerogative. But make sure that you know what it is that you're signing up for. And I think we can start to put a little bit of pressure on these institutions that have been around for a while, and say, you know what, is that really to students' ultimate benefit? Or can they, if they want, dedicate themselves to that study, not sign a piece of paper?
Right.
And who knows, maybe in a decade, they're going to be called to study with some other organization or teacher.
Mhm.
Um, I really do believe that that's where it needs to go,
Mhm.
because as one of my teachers has said, the way that the assumption that we have discovered all there is to be discovered about spiritual practice, meditation, yoga, that it's just done is just not true, because
Mhm.
the universe doesn't work that way. We're constantly expanding, so it couldn't be true,
Yeah.
right? So if we start to give ourselves the permission to explore in new and different ways and create new and different ways of doing it, that is empowering. That is
Mhm.
exciting, while deeply honoring the foundations
Mhm.
and the lineages and the people who have pushed certain things forward. So that's a little bit of my soapbox on
Mhm.
that as far as my personal experience. But with my students, I think it's really important, um, that they know that they're the ones that have the direct connection. And
Mhm.
that's where I think the guru or the teacher or the church or whoever it is, putting themselves between the seeker and source, is where it gets messy.
Mhm.
But being the one that's pointing you towards that light and saying, hey, do you see that?
Mhm.
Like, that's accessible. That's, I think, what a teacher's meant to do. They're meant to point the way, to guide, but then
Mhm.
always putting it back to the seeker, that they're the
Mhm.
ones doing it, not the teacher. And so that's when mystical experiences, and maybe we can get into this, Kat, mystical experiences can be misattributed to
Mm.
the teacher.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens all the time. And even, I mean, even like attributing them to psychedelics or any of these plant medicines, which are their own teacher, which are teachers in their own right, but starting to feel dependent on any one catalyst, whether it be, a psychedelic or person to guide you there, is again where you start to negotiate your power, right? And become dependent on this substance or person or you know congregation or lineage to take you somewhere that you have complete and full access to in your own body in your own breath. We were talking about this a couple weeks ago offline about Egypt and the pyramids. And I have a few friends who have been called to Egypt in the last, 5 months or so, and you as well. And I think it's so interesting to hear each person's journey through that pilgrimage and how unique each person's initiation there has been. And each person's like narrative about the pyramids, about the land, about the portals that exist there. It's interesting to hear the subtle, what is that? The subtle giving of their power to these places, and yes, there's something to be said about the potency of the portals that exist there, like these specific axes and coordinates that are no doubt spiritual vortexes. And I do also truly and deeply believe that that frequency that exists in those spiritual sites, and you've gone to depth on this exact thing in a couple of your solo episodes about your trip to Egypt. But just to echo, it's like that exact frequency is available in, to access in your backyard in Ohio. Like that that power, that channel essentially that you're more
Mm-hmm.
easily tapped into in those places, yes, is available anywhere. And we're so much more powerful than we know. In our recent channeling, in the Inner Sanctum, our monthly membership, the collective that you channel, kept coming back to this of like your species is so much more powerful than and
Mm.
and I think we hear that a lot, but there was something about being in that specific container and being open in that way, receiving that truth that felt so powerful, and that there's a lot of reverence that I do have for these lineages. I've studied I've studied in them, and I do
Hmm.
have so much reverence for them. And I always come back to the power exists in me, in each of us, in we are God. Like, it's interesting because I grew up as a devout Christian. I was like extremely religious. And so much of my power was given over to the church and these priests and these people who I did pedestalize. And
Hmm.
as I've transitioned from that into my own understanding of spirituality, into my own practice of coming back home to me, it's so clear to see in hindsight where I did exactly that, where I gave my power over, and how simply reorienting around a lot of the same fundamental truths that I felt there, but in spiritual practices, puts the power back into my hands, puts the power to access spirit, to open the aperture, to tune into truth, to quantum leap, like however you want to categorize it, puts that back into my hands as
Mm.
a powerful spirit in a human body.
Mm. Love all that so much. Used one of my favorite words lately, reverence.
It's a good one.
Yeah, and I think that there isn't anything, well, there is something wrong with the spiritual community and the modes of leadership.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean everything's wrong. It just
Hmm.
means there's some things that are coming up. And the opportunity, I think, is this authority model
Mm.
of awakening. This is a maturation. This is great. Like, we're
Mhm.
maturing as a species. This is, yes, there's something that we're discovering, that we don't like about how certain people have been leading in the spiritual community, that have been leading for a long time. Deepak Chopra, I'm talking about you. Um, and who I had even spent time learning from.
Mhm.
And there is that moment of grief where you're like, oh my gosh, like, this person was not who it was they had projected themselves to be. And in that kind of awakening, which that is what this is that's happening right now. It's an awakening, it's an opportunity. This authority model is shifting, and it needs to, for this new age. And we can really look at, I think, why does this happen? Why is sexual misconduct?
Mhm.
Why is male, especially male leadership, so prone to, seemingly, this rise in spiritual leadership power and this abuse of it?
Mhm.
And we can also remember that up until recently, last 100 years, it was mostly men who were in that had the opportunity, except for maybe in a few different lineages where you could become a nun. But it was mostly men that were studying in these spaces
Mhm.
and had the opportunity to be in the presence of a renowned teacher. And there are many, again, I'm speaking in specific terms. There's lots of Sri Yukteswar. If if you read Autobiography of a Yogi, there's clearly very powerful transmitters of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But those people, those advanced beings, had to have done the deep, deep work to release themselves
Mm-hmm.
of the attachments that come when they find themselves in that moment of power, and they find themselves surrounded by vulnerable people, and they find themselves suddenly having access to money and building empires on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious what you think, Kat, but one of the reasons that I think this has happened, first of all, I think it's the rise of the feminine that's really bringing this to light in the masculine. And I think that the men in these positions of power, the power in itself is so intoxicating. And so I think, and we can see all of this in each one of us. So this is not to say that this is all their problem. Like all
Right.
these elements, like they live in all of us. So that's why we can have compassion for the journeys that we're on. We can have compassion for the journeys that others are on while holding people to account.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what's going on, or what could be going on, is that devotion becomes vulnerability that is taken advantage of,
Mm-hmm.
because the person that's holding the line for the container that is the group is not holding themselves to account. You know, I heard something interesting, and all of this has made me think back. It was like 2018, and I did a workshop in LA with Eckhart Tolle.
Cool.
And I know it was the best. Talk about somebody who
Yeah.
transmits presence. Like he doesn't have to say
Totally.
anything. Like you just
Totally.
feel it. It is palpable,
Talk about a pure teacher. I mean,
pure, like
yeah.
beautiful. Well, let's even like catch ourselves on that.
I know.
He's still in a human body. So
Right.
that even though he may deeply have understood his ego and probably has moved through the majority of elements of it, if you're still, this is my understanding, if you're still in the human container,
Mm-hmm.
you still have things that you're working on from the
Yeah.
perspective of this container. I think that's also where we get tripped up as seekers, because we see somebody like Tolle, like Deepak, and Ram Dass, and we assume that they have checked the box
Mm-hmm.
and that they are free. And what comes with that? This is the power that we as the seekers, if we want to put it that way, give to that person willingly.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes a pressure on them to keep up the charade of the enlightened being, which I think is a slippery, slippery slope.
Totally.
But if you embrace the fact that if you're in this human body, you got human shit that you're working on. It might be super high level advanced shit that you're working on, but there's still shit. And so if a teacher isn't open about that,
Right.
you know, and the teachers that I study with, even though they're highly advanced, they are open about it. They're like, I still have my moments in X, Y, and Z. That builds trust, because I'm like, yes, you're advanced. No, I'm not going to give my power away to you because you're the thing. You how could I possibly know better than you? I think that's the trap. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's so important as a teacher, in any capacity, whether that be like a yoga teacher, if you're in more of a, hold space regularly, to be forthcoming about the fact that yes, you are not perfect. You have not reached any destination. You are still a human. You are susceptible to the same, you know, distortion of the ego that any of us are. Yes, it might manifest differently. It might not be as extreme, or it might, you might be able to metabolize and transmute it very quickly and come back into clarity. But I completely agree. Is that if you're in a human body, you you will be susceptible to forces that want to distort clarity, because it's just
Mm-hmm.
it's a part of this path in a human body. And so I think it's so important. And one thing you said, like that power that you feel as a teacher, and that you mentioned that we're all susceptible to that as well, whether again you're a yoga teacher, any space that you hold.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've felt it. I've had to check myself and be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh wow, I I feel the spiritual ego coming in here. And
Mm-hmm.
is that truth? Is that where I can truly guide and teach from? Is that what being a teacher is about? Is it about feeling this power, or this admiration? Is that what it's about? Or is it about coming into union and reflecting the love that is this person that
Mm-hmm.
might be looking at me this way, that back to them, right? And to the point of why it seems to be that, there's a pattern that men are more likely to abuse this power. And what comes up for me is that there's such is exactly what I'm describing. It's like it's so much easier, it feels like. I mean, given my experience isn't of as a woman, it feels like it's easier for a woman to drop back into the heart without as much resistance. So when we find ourselves in that place of spiritual ego, which is inevitable if you're in a space of holding space, if you're in that role of holding space for people to transmute their own shadow, kind of to what we talked about earlier. Like, it's natural for them to associate you as the person who gets them there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in that space where you feel that from people, it's easier, it feels like, for me, for women to be able to check that and move back into the heart and move back into what it actually means, like the foundations of what it means to be a teacher, to be a guide. And there's less, and I'm not, there's of course women out there who abuse this, but it just feels like there's less of a um, need. Like, we're less reliant on that power and on
Mm-hmm.
that shadow of our lower triangle to be inflamed, and we're more easily able to drop into the heart and come back to truth and come back to like purity and guidance than men. I think it's harder.
Yeah. I was thinking the same. I was thinking the same thing. And also men have this conditioning, right? To gain power, to be bold, to be economically stable, to be rich,
Mhm.
and so you have all of these, and this is obviously no excuse for that, but you do have this societal conditioning, and women, or the feminine energy even,
Mhm.
is a lot more communal. It's a lot more,
Mhm.
you're very aware of the impact that is happening on those around you,
Mhm.
more so than when you're in your hyper masculine.
Mhm.
And so, I think what I've seen is sometimes, I think that's why we have a lot of this biohacking, which is great. I love the science side, but it's like, okay, how can we hack our way through limitation? And there's a
Mhm.
place for that perhaps, but it's it's very logical, it's very linear, it's very compartmentalized, and it's very individual in most cases. But this communal aspect is something that the feminine deeply understands.
Mhm.
And the masculine, if they're not developing their feminine, side, their feminine energy, like you're saying, to come into their heart space, then you're going to get tripped up when that power starts to become present for you. The ego is going to start to be in a whole different way. The ego is very subversive. We don't realize how subversive it can be. And all of a sudden it's like the people are handing you their power.
Right.
They're saying, oh my gosh, you're amazing. You're intelligent. You changed my life. And you're like, you know what I did?
You're right.
That's what the ego says. And it's like, you're welcome.
Yeah, I am special.
I am special. I am the thing. I am the teacher, you know? Ooh, you gotta watch that one. And for me, what becomes a more empowering model of authority, because, authority really to me means being your own author. And so this new model that's being birthed is making sure people know, like the channel was saying, that you are so powerful. You could have absolutely no teacher and decide to sit with yourself and to explore the self. And you would come to and can access all of the wisdom of all of the ages. It is available to you always. And so I think being a teacher, that's what I'm focused on. And it gives me joy when I see somebody realize that for themselves. It's not from a teaching necessarily, even though that can be like pointing the way towards the light. But it's a moment that you can't take away from anybody, that is theirs alone to step into. And they may not realize that if you don't kind of make that known too, that it's not through me, it's not through another teacher, it's all happening through you. You are the creator. And why do you think sexual misconduct is so rampant? It tends to go hand in hand with the especially male leadership. And this goes way back. Like, it always blows my mind that I can't remember where this was. It was a monastery in the recent years, and they discovered there was rampant drug abuse in the monastery. I think it was meth. It was like hardcore stuff. And you're
so
like,
intense.
monks and meth? Like, what?
It's also just not an easy one to like slip under the radar. It's like everybody, isn't that pretty clear that these monks are on meth?
Like, yeah. So just to say that, like, the human condition is complex and nuanced, and we need to hold to account and design and envision a better way, while also being very careful about the shame and judgment side. But the sexual misconduct is a thing that happens quite often, and we are clearly seeing this play out as well. I encourage you to look up that for yourself when you're mentally stable and can. But it seems to me that in the vulnerability, in that awakening portal, that birth canal that you're in, where you're just like, you're in it and you're awakening and you're vulnerable and you're reconstructing your sense of self, quite literally, there's an imprint that can be made, it seems like psychologically and physiologically, that can put the seeker in a position where they are vulnerable, and then the leader takes advantage of that vulnerability. And I think a lot of times, and this is my own personal opinion, take it or leave it, this focus of sexuality being the way to awakening, I think is a very slippery slope as a teaching in general, because Tantra, it's more about union. It's more about connection and interconnection first. And Kundalini is not a sexual energy. I've talked about this before. It's
Mhm.
just an energy. It just happens to meet your first few centers first, which activates those nerves and can feel like a sensation of sexual activation.
Mhm.
That does not mean it is sexual energy.
Mhm.
So I think this has gotten a bit twisted in my mind. And I think it can be dangerous to open, especially people who are new to the spiritual journey, into this teaching that the sexual experience is an awakening experience.
Mhm.
What do you think? I know that's a that's a
Yeah.
loaded one.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly where I was gonna go too, like, so so pointed around, sexual misconduct within spirituality, and, you know, I had my own first encounters with this kind of dark energy, really, just a few years ago. Up until then, I'd
Mm,
been so blessed. The teachers that had come into my life had mostly been female, and I there's naivete that I work with in my being, and so I had never expected or really held space for the reality in which this this abuse of power is taking place. And I, thankfully didn't experience it in that way, but I was around it in the way where my alarm system went off. And
mm,
I was like,
mhm.
there's a very clear parasitic dark energy here in this present, in this teacher. And it was interesting because he was a very popular teacher in the area. He was a yoga teacher, he was guiding all of these spiritual experiences and was extremely popular. And so then it's easy, I'm sure people can maybe relate to this experience. It's easy to kind of gaslight yourself into,
Totally.
oh
Yep.
no, I'm like projecting something weird onto him. Like I'm sure he has pure intentions because obviously everybody is tuning
Because of
into
the
something.
popularity. Yeah.
Right. And so it's easy to kind of subdue your own knowing and your own intuition around whether a teacher is truly in their purity and in their light. Um so from that moment on, after being in that sphere, it became very clear that it's imperative to move through these spaces, navigate these spiritual containers with a level of heightened discernment. And honestly, for me, there's like a protection until I have taken the time to audit a teacher and be like, how do I feel after I leave their presence? Do I feel like my energy's been siphoned? Like it's been, you know, like just a small percentage of it has been taken away from me, because I think that's a lot of what drives that sort of abuse. It's like they're thriving on siphoning the life force of vulnerable seekers, of vulnerable students. And our sexuality and our sexual life force is the most, you know, direct access
Sacred.
to. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's sacred. It's the most direct path to that life force energy. And so in siphoning it, it's the easiest way for that dark energy, for that parasitic energy to survive. And especially with light students. Like we're all light, but there's, and you see them. There's like the more innocent, or
Mm,
it,
yeah.
and obviously, we've seen a lot come to light with that innocence is directly correlated to children and young
Yeah.
human beings, right? And so there's a direct correlation to the amount of life force energy you can extract from those who are closer to light, aka closer to their purity, still in their innocence, their apertures,
Mm-hmm.
their baseline is the aperture is open. They don't approach people with that analytical lens, with that,
Mm.
are they
Yeah.
safe? Are they not? They're trusting. So it's it's an unfortunate, shadow that we're dealing with as a
Yeah.
collective of that lower triangle, those lower energy centers operating and stewarding the guidance of these teachers. And
Mhm.
there's so much, our culture has been built upon a foundation of sexualizing women. And so often women are more likely to make up the congregation. Women are more likely drawn to seeking to these spiritual containers, whether it be yoga classes. I mean, specifically there, but a
Mm.
lot of spirituality, women are more likely to go there first. And so there's a what's the word? Conflation between like success and being able to infiltrate and conquer a woman's sexuality, whether and
Yeah.
it's under the guise of like this will be a mystical experience for you because you're also receiving my life force energy and I'm this, yeah, barf.
Yeah.
And I'm
I
this,
just about had to barf.
enlightened, yeah, this enlightened being. And so, it's dark. It's so dark. And
Yeah.
it's so important to talk about and to
Mm-hmm.
empower people to not, not avoid spiritual spaces, not avoid male teachers even,
Mm-hmm.
but to enter these spaces and to navigate these spaces with a heightened discernment, with a a very clear like protection of your channel before you enter, and taking time to audit how your field, how your being feels after interacting with these teachers, because we have a natural radar for dark and light.
Mm-hmm.
And what is most easily, like I said earlier, most easily um or most prevalent in subduing that radar is popularity. Is if somebody, Deepak Chopra has 3.2 million followers on Instagram.
Still, what are
Yeah,
y'all doing? Like,
still
unfollow, please.
unfollow. And
Find a new spiritual teacher.
yeah. But it's so, again, it's so easy to think that just because a teacher has a large following, that they're pure. And so don't
Mm.
avoid spiritual spaces, but empower yourself to tune into your own inner knowing as to, is this pure?
Yes, 100%. Discernment, intuition. Those are two things that is very much to your benefit to develop as early as you can, and to
Mhm,
start to learn how to distinguish between the ego, the fear response, and your intuition and that discernment.
mhm,
But yeah, gosh, there is a rage we talked about before getting on today
mhm,
that can come up and is valid and wants to be seen and wants to be moved. And I think for you that are listening, when that rage comes forward, that anger, that these pure, innocent, children, women, people who are genuinely just trying to find some peace,
mhm,
some better understanding of themselves, and to be not held in that intention and in that moment of need. That's on all of us in the community to do better as
Mhm.
teachers, as leaders. And I think this breakdown that's happening in the hierarchy of awakening knowledge is fantastic, because I think what's going to happen is it's less about that one person and
Mhm.
it's more about the community around you. And there's going to be people in front of you, maybe far in front of you, and they're reaching their hand back. There's going to be people beside you. And you can, as this kind of evolving organism of awakening, connect in where you need to connect in. And I think that's as far as visioning what's possible from here, that's where I like to spend a good amount of time after the rage and the sadness has
Mhm.
passed. Is like, okay, what's next here? What
Mhm.
what wants to be? What's the opportunity? Because this is not working.
Right.
This is not the way. Our children need to be protected. The vulnerable need to be protected
Mhm.
and gently guided to how powerful they are and how beautiful they are and how
Mhm.
loved they are.
Mhm.
That's the opportunity here. And another thing, and this is very spiritually um, kind of esoteric, but women, we're the pathway to creation physically on this planet.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a very subversive, and you spoke to this beautifully, this need to dominate
Mm.
the feminine. This, and we're seeing that play out in ways that are not even related to the spiritual community. That it's this opportunity that we have a choice to take or not, when somebody that has less power than us, or less realized power, because nobody really has less power than us, and we don't honor that. And that requires, the ability to see that within ourselves requires a degree of awakening, to even, otherwise you're just not going to see it in yourself. And I think the people that are having a reckoning right now, there was a level both of permission that they gave themselves and didn't hold themselves to account, the community, the people they worked with, no, just did not hold them to account because of their perceived power. All of us need to do better. And I think there's also what you're pointing to is this leadership immunity, that if you're in a position of leadership, as soon as you've taken that stand or that position, that means, and you see this in business too, that means that you're now no longer held to account. We see that in our government, right? That now that you're in a certain position of power, that your judgment is sound because of the fact that you have all this money or you have this position. And that, I think, is another belief that we're being asked to challenge as a collective. It's just not necessarily true. But to also not demonize people that are leaders, that do have platforms. So it can become a slippery slope, and it's something that we're all going to be walking ourselves through.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's the responsibility has is shifting to the people, to the collective, to audit the people who are empowered, to no longer accept what we're being told as truth. That's coming up in so many different ways, but especially when it comes to people in power, when it comes to media, when it comes to these perceptions or facades of people that we're seeing. Like if Deepak Chopra has 3.2 million followers, the kind of like you pointed to earlier, the pressure to maintain a certain persona online.
Hmm.
We are now given the responsibility to question, um, not necessarily, what's the word? Believe that every person is only that, just a persona, and clearly tune into whether this person's transmission is pure. And that spans across government, media, celebrities, all of these people who have influence on our culture, on our society. The ball is in our court now. I have this,
Mm-hmm.
my husband and I actually got into this debate like really early on in our courtship around Joe Dispenza because I had read multiple Joe Dispenza books. He was a huge part of my awakening, and I never gave him my power in the way that, you know, he's my only teacher or everything he says and does is truth. But Nathan feels this, like he feels this rage essentially to protect the people who are in that place of giving their power away, to the point where he blames the guru or the teacher. And myself in that debate came back and said, but that responsibility is always on the student. It's always on the student. We can't trust any teacher, any guru to have the best interest of anybody else, at the forefront of their teaching. Like, that would be a beautiful utopia, but we can't operate with that as the assumption. Like, it's always the
Mm.
responsibility of the student to assess to what degree they've given their power to this person, and assess to what degree they're reliant on this single person's transmission as truth. Um, which I feel like we've talked about in so many different iterations today, but it always is a conversation we come back to of like, it is always the responsibility of the student. And now it just feels even more so like that is going to be the through thread of the new world being birthed, of this new cycle coming to life. It's our
Mm.
responsibility, each of ours, to audit those
Mm-hmm.
who claim to be righteous or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, righteousness is a heck of a thing, and there is a slippery slope here, right? Where we start to perceive, and I think the point you're making is a really good one about personal responsibility.
Mhm.
We have a personal responsibility and we have a collective responsibility, but ultimately, the only person you can control here, the
Mhm.
only person you can influence, is the person listening to this podcast, or it's you, it's
Mhm.
me, it's Kat. That's the ultimate responsibility, yes. And it was interesting to me. I'll maybe share a story here of, if you read Autobiography of a Yogi, which I highly recommend.
Mhm.
It's a powerful book by Paramahansa Yogananda. It's the book that Steve Jobs gave to everyone at his funeral. And he had a school, or an ashram, and received a lot of backlash for being a cult in, I think, the 1950s, I want to say. And I think we throw that word around, cult, quite a bit. So maybe in this conversation, it's helpful to define it. And it wasn't a cult. It was just, there happened to be quite a few women that were studying, which was new. I mean, can you imagine in the 1950s being able to go and study? There was never any abuse that I'm aware of. But there was a cultural backlash to it because this brown man was in a position of perceived power, especially in relation to women. So there was this whole kind of racist, weird thing that went on in the 1950s. And so we have to use our discernment, because it can become a witch hunt, and that doesn't do anybody any good. yes, hold people to account. That needs to happen. That should happen. We hold ourselves to account. But a cult is, there's a few things that are involved with that. One is control of information. We kind of talked about this, where it's like this information's the only information, right? That's dogma. There's some sort of us versus them, like we have it figured out, but the other people in the world don't. There's a group community superiority that starts to form. There's an identity replacement. So your identity starts to become this community's identity. There's leadership immunity. They cannot be held to account and they cannot be challenged. And there's a exit cost, like your family is going to be involved or money is involved, and it makes exiting that community extremely difficult, detrimental, and there's usually also some form of emotional, mental, even sexual abuse. So that's a cult. And so intensity doesn't necessarily equal cult. It definitely, in most times, a cult is intense. So, but I think those are things for us to keep in mind when we're all pioneers here of creating a new way. So we need to give ourselves space to create this new way. And I think that Kat and I have hopefully given you some kind of pointers on how to navigate this to the best of our current ability. And I really think if we're to end here, Kat, what do you see as the biggest opportunity? What can spiritual awakening look like in the future with this power dynamic shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I think what comes up for me is the clear opportunity, which I think we've pointed to back again and again and again throughout this conversation, is that you, the listener, each of us is the source of truth and knowledge and wisdom. And these teachers are beautiful portals to access different vantage points of the sphere of truth. Like, these are advanced practitioners who have spent decades, mastering their mind. And so, yes, use them as tools, right? Like, look to them for guidance and wisdom, and always come back to yourself as the final final jurisdiction, final word in any decision, any question, any guidance you're seeking. Always come back to you, while knowing that these teachers and lineages and books are tools that can supplement your own knowing, your own power, your own coming home to that.
Mm.
Because I really don't want this, which I don't think it has, but I really don't want this conversation to villainize teachers or even gurus. Like, that's not the objective. It's more to empower you to choose who you seek wisdom from, knowing that your intuition, your radar, your own channel will never lead you astray if you're listening, if you're truly deeply listening to who is meant to be your teacher on this path.
Love that. Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And to not be afraid to hold others to account.
Mm-hmm.
If your teacher, whoever it is that you're studying with, says something that feels off or doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense to you, ensuring that there is a line of communication there, that you can have those questions answered, that
Mm-hmm.
you can you can ask the hard questions, because for somebody who is truly advanced, there are no hard questions.
Mm.
There is complete transparency, because that's the way they're living. That's who they are, at least at a certain level. It can't really be any other way.
Right. There's no identity in knowing the answer or
Right.
the right answer.
Exactly. Exactly. When you start to feel, this is a good barometer for teachers too, when you start to feel that crunchiness when you're asked something or something comes into your experience, and we've all been there, it's a very interesting process to work through. And you can feel the ego wanting to have the answer, right? Or wanting to assert itself in hierarchy. And remember, the ego, it's not just a higher hierarchy, it's also lower. It doesn't care really which direction. It just wants to be in a relational position to another. And that's why the ego, many people don't understand this, can be a method or device through which the self diminishes itself in order to be in a different relationship to another. So that's also something to watch. And I think there's some interesting teachers out there, if we want to reference this. Alan Watts, for some reason, keeps on coming up for me today, because he was a great teacher, but he was a very imperfect man. But he was very transparent about his imperfection. He deeply understood some things, and he made huge impacts on society. But he was an alcoholic. I think people forget this, and he was not hiding it. So there was a certain level, maybe you could say, that Alan Watts wasn't necessarily at as far as consciousness and his own development, but intellectually and certainly in some powerful ways, he understood things and was able to communicate things that were of deep value. So I think something that needs to change on the seeker side is looking to your teachers as though they are perfect beings.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, if they're on the planet, they're just not.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
We do not need to keep up this charade of teachers being perfect. It doesn't do them any good, and it doesn't do you any good. Now, perfection is a big word, and I'm not saying that in the context of, blowing past their imperfections. I'm saying it in the context of enlightenment is a moment, but it's not the end of our development. There is, believe it or not, more to come. So you never get it done. You just don't. And as soon as you embody that knowing, then you start to handle yourself differently, have more compassion. There's not really an endpoint to meet. It's just experience, although it's a lot of fun to awaken. But if you can remember that, even if that teacher walks into the room and changes your life, that is a powerful thing, and I've experienced it. It does not mean that that person is the be-all, end-all. And it means somebody that you can revere. I think reverence came through as a really powerful mode to be in relation to your fellow humans. Reverence, see, this is where reverence is so powerful, because it's not you giving power over to anything. It's you seeing yourself, you having a deep awe for just life as a whole, and you're bringing that into your relationships around you. So hold your teachers and the people around you that you are inspired by in deep reverence. But it does not mean that you need to give your power away to them. So I think the opportunity here is we're moving from an authority structured spirituality to a self-guided or self-referential spirituality. So instead of you looking to a teacher and following the enlightened one, instead, I think and I believe this deeply with SoulPod, we're giving you the tools, the scaffolding, to understand consciousness itself.
Mhm.
And maybe, yes, teachers will still point the way. I don't think that's going anywhere. But the mechanics are going to be available to you, free of dogma. And the spiritual scientist, I think, is really going to take hold
Mhm.
in this new era, which I'm very excited about. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of really beautiful possibility.
Super on brand for us.
Very. So I hope today's conversation was helpful. If it brought up any feelings, triggers, or anything like that, I encourage you to journal it out and to sit with it and to move that emotion. It's understandable. We've all been sitting with it as well. We're
Mhm.
with you. And then we can get going on creating a new paradigm, new
Mhm.
structures. And it will only continue to evolve past my lifetime and beyond. It has to.
Mhm.
So thank you, Kat, for joining me on this conversation. I think it
Yeah,
was really needed and really powerful.
totally. Thank you.
Till next time, light beings. Thank you for journeying with us today, light being. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, we want to invite you to explore the SoulPod app, where you can immerse yourself in daily lessons, guided meditations, and breath work to develop a soul nourishing daily ritual and tune back into your own inner guidance system. You can download SoulPod in the App Store or directly from the show notes to start your free trial today and awaken the ancient wisdom within you.